Y'all know that period cravings and a weight loss journey and staying in a calorie deficit do not work well together. So here are my biggest tips on how I stay consistent during my period. Make sure that those cravings don't get in the way of my calorie deficit or consistency in my weight loss journey. So obviously one of the best things that you can do is find alternatives that are lower calorie for the things that you're craving. So like for example, if I'm craving ice cream, I'll make a high protein Ninja Creamy. If I'm craving brownies, sometimes I'll make protein brownies at home. But a lot of times we know that the things that you want aren't something that you can find alternatives for. They're the sugary, like really good high calorie stuff. And when I'm experiencing that, there's two things that I do. So for example, if I'm craving crumble or something, I have to weigh my head if it's worth it or not, and if I'm going to be able to maintain a calorie deficit if I try to fit that in my calorie budget. For example, on a night, if I have like 600 calories left and I really want a crumble cookie, I'm not going to use a lot of those calories on anything else, and I'm like, okay, yeah, it's totally worth it. I have these calories left anyways, and it's not going to break my consistency later in the day, so I'm just going to go spend it on a crumble cookie. But if that's in the beginning of the day, it's totally a different story, because if you make that choice in the beginning of the day, then you're definitely going to set yourself up for failure that night, because you're probably going to be really hungry later in the day if you use a lot of calories on something very calorically dense at the beginning of the day. Normally the only time I'll do that is if I save up my calories for that specific instance, like later in the day. And another thing I kind of give myself a little balance with is my protein intake. When I'm on my period, if I'm having a day where I'm like, okay, I'm gonna use a big bulk of calories for something that I'm really craving, then I'm okay with not hitting my protein goal that day, because obviously if you're using like 400, 500 of your calories to eat something that isn't high protein, you're gonna hinder your protein goal. I'm okay with that, because if that means that I'm gonna stay consistent in my calorie deficit for longer instead of like going over my calories into a surplus, I think it's a sacrifice worth making. But that's not to say that it's a habit. So everything in moderation. And am I using 6 days out of the week to not hit my protein goal that week? No. But there might be 1 or 2 days where it's worth it to me to make sure that I can maintain my calorie deficit consistently and also satisfy a craving that I'm having. And then the next step is just going to be like, you just got to do it. Like, things are allowed to be hard, but if you use a whole week as an excuse to not stay consistent out of that month, 7 days of inconsistency and 7 days of eating whatever you want or going over your calories in a surplus or whatever definitely have the ability to take away some of your progress that you had at the beginning of that month. Obviously, it depends on how drastic those cravings are or how indulgent your habits are that week, but they can be bad enough to revert your progress, and that's the last thing that we want. The majority of the time, it's going to have to be a situation where you just suck it up and do the damn thing. It's a hard truth, but things are allowed to be hard, and it's hard because it's worth it. I'm not going to sit here and say, yeah, every single day you're on your period, all 7 days, you can give into whatever cravings you want and it's going to be fine. Because if the habits look like that, it's probably going to have a negative impact on your results. You obviously have to be able to take accountability for that if that's something that you do. And also, I think it's important to remember that this week isn't going to last forever. You have to get in the mindset of doing things for your future self and not doing things for yourself in this moment. So you need to think about, okay, when I get to the end of this week, how is my future self going to feel if I use that whole week as an excuse to not work towards my goals? Or how is my future self going to feel whenever I didn't make excuses for myself and I stayed consistent even though I had hormonal cravings? So yes, there are ways that you can fit in things in moderation, make small changes to your routine to account for things like this on your period. You also can't use it as an overall broad excuse to do whatever you want, because that's just not going to work.